We were, as Neera said, an improbable experiment, a living, breathing testament to the revolutionary idea that a nation could be governed not by a king or a tyrant or a warlord, but by the people themselves. Instead of raw power and unquestioned edicts, our framers set up an ingenious system of checks and balances. Instead of gallows and guillotines, we developed robust institutions, independent courts, a dogged free press, apolitical law enforcement to ensure transparency, accountability, and the rule of law. When immigrants like my great-grandparents looked to the old world, they saw poverty and pogroms. And when they looked to this country, they saw, with good reason, a golden Medina, a golden land. We drew the best and brightest to our shores, who rose from the huddled masses to become titans of industry, Nobel laureates, even, God help us, members of the U.S. Congress. Our nation, our democracy, never stood still. To secure the blessings of liberty, GIs, American GIs, marched through Europe. To expand the promise of democracy, Americans from all walks of life marched across the Edmund Pettus Bridge. We became the envy of the world not because we were perfect, but because we always aspired to be more perfect. Over the generations, that democracy we so faithfully tendered has delivered record prosperity, unparalleled innovation, a standard of living that has climbed higher and higher. And so we came to believe that our democracy was inevitable. The generation that stopped fascism in its tracks imagined that freedom would be forever on the march, that walls would continue to come down, that rights and opportunity were ever expanding and never receding. We were wrong. As we've now learned painfully, perilously, our democracy is only as strong as its ability to meet the needs of the American people. Right now, it isn't. It's as simple, as stark as that. We asked people to believe in the American dream as their wages stagnated and the cost of housing, healthcare, and groceries soared. We imagined young people would continue to put their faith in the system when they're weighed down with debt and worried that the careers that they've trained for will be rendered obsolete by an algorithm. We expected our fellow citizens to safeguard this magnificent American experiment, even as the supposed guardians of our democracy in this town have proven themselves too incapable or too captured by big money or narrow interests to care about the needs of those they claim to represent. That shining American promise was not broken by accident. It was broken intentionally by billionaires padding their stock portfolios and buying up politicians, by self-interested CEOs cynically dialing up the outrage and disinformation on their social media platforms, by politicians who saw more value in stoking grievance than solving problems, even as ordinary Americans fell further and further behind. And into this uncertainty and despair rode a demagogue down a golden escalator promising that he alone could fix it. The devastation Trump wrought in his first term cannot be eclipsed from memory. Families torn apart, allies forsaken, very fine people on both sides. All culminating in a mob of violent insurrectionists desecrating the U.S. Capitol to overturn the results of a free and fair election. But this time around, something feels different. These past 242 days, especially in recent weeks, we have crossed some unseen Rubicon. The air of menace is heightened. The last threads tethering the president to reality are fraying. In this second Trump term, there are no generals, Mattis or Kelly, to restrain Donald Trump's basest impulses. Only sycophants, only enablers, only a cabinet of cronies egging him on, even more incompetent, even more venal, even more subservient than in Trump's first term. The congressional GOP is now so servile that their occasional whispers of dissent dissipate in the wind, like the tear gas lobbed in our streets. And the Roberts Court, they're more than ready to rubber stamp Trump's brazenly unconstitutional actions. They've already given him the one thing that every would-be autocrat craves: immunity, a license to break the law because apparently he is the law. In this moment, Trump is truly unshackled, and he vowed he would bring retribution, and so he has. He teased that he wanted to become a dictator on day one, and so he seems resolved to be. He called for terminating the Constitution, and every day he demonstrates just how hostile he is to our founding charter. Look around us. It's not just that it can happen here, it is happening here. There is a particularly bitter irony in all of this. As we approach the 250th anniversary of our independence from a king, we are finding ourselves facing a man who would be king. The framers understood that danger well, which is why they set down in the Declaration of Independence their long list of grievances against their British masters. These grievances are not nearly as familiar as the preamble of the Declaration, with all its poetic recitation of truths that are self-evident. So let me list a few. He has obstructed the administration of justice. Our founders grieved. Made judges dependent on his will alone. Cut off trade with all parts of the world. Deprived us in many cases of the benefits of trial by jury. Transported us beyond seas to be tried for pretended offenses. Kept among us in times of peace standing armies. If those grievances of our founders sound familiar, they should, because the man who would rule America today has done all that and more. He has weaponized the Department of Justice to go after political opponents, raiding their homes and combing through their mortgage applications. He has extorted media and law firms whose work he abhors, launching the most blatant attacks against the free press in American history, and leaving us to wonder what will be left of the First Amendment when he's done. He has usurped the power of Congress with unilateral tariffs, rescissions, and the illegal impoundment of funding already appropriated. He has declared war on Democratic-run cities, sending in the National Guard over the vehement objections of local officials. He has targeted whole groups of Americans to fuel his nativist grievances: immigrants, Muslims, the LGBTQ community, women deprived of reproductive freedom. He has emboldened and elevated white nationalists and anti-Semites and weaponized the fight against anti-Semitism to advance his own agenda. He has monetized the presidency to pocket billions, accepting a Qatari palace in the sky, while the American people struggled to pay their rent here on solid ground. He has established a protection racket for American businesses. The cost to avoid his regime's interference: censorship, equity stakes, a percentage fee to Trump's treasury, or a personal payment to the president himself. He has imposed his own twisted reality ahead of security and economic well-being, dismissing apolitical generals who deviated from the party line, forcing our intelligence community to justify his unfounded beliefs, crusading against the independence of the Federal Reserve, firing the head of the Bureau of Labor Statistics when the job numbers were not to his liking. He has sought to bend educational and cultural institutions, schools, universities, the Smithsonian, the Kennedy Center, to reflect his distorted views. He is taking life-saving vaccines away from the public because of an allergy to science and a kind of sickness taking hold of the regime. We have seen this movie before. We know where this treacherous slope leads. It is Hungary under Orban, Turkey under Erdogan, El Salvador under Bukele. It is Venezuela under Maduro and Russia under Putin. In Czechoslovakia, where I lived as a young prosecutor, I watched a cunning autocrat exploit inequality and xenophobia to literally divide that country in two. These regimes may promise a golden age or a return to lost greatness. And what do they deliver instead? Inflation, debt, corruption, a midnight knock, and the sudden disappearance of critics and dissenters. Now, I realize the picture I have painted is distressingly bleak, but importantly, vitally, there is cause for hope. Other nations have clawed their way back from authoritarian rule. Just as democracy is not inevitable or indefinite, neither is autocracy. Where there was an Iron Curtain, there was also trade unionists gathered in solidarity at a shipyard in Gdansk, candlelight vigils in Leipzig, human chains stretching across the Baltics. Where there was Pinochet's brutal junta, there were students, priests, and workers singing, "Joy was coming." Where there was apartheid law in South Africa, there were the voices of Nelson Mandela and Desmond Tutu and townships across the country that eventually carried the day. So how do we find our way back? How do we prevent the further erosion of our democracy? The answer is never political violence like the kind we witnessed in Utah last week, nor the kind we saw in Minnesota earlier this summer, or in Butler, Pennsylvania last July, or in San Francisco in 2022. Never. The answer to how we defend our democracy is always with the tools of democracy: legislation, litigation, and mobilization. Yes, Democrats are in the minority. Yes, our Republican colleagues have wholly abdicated their role as a co-equal branch of government. That does not mean that we cannot put up a fight. I just reintroduced a package of reforms we call the Protecting Our Democracy Act to codify many of the norms that Trump has violated with impunity. Under our legislation, a president can no longer enrich himself using the power of his office. Whistleblowers would have added protections. Special employees would be subject to ethics and conflict of interest laws. And political candidates and parties would be explicitly prohibited from soliciting or accepting foreign assistance to influence an election. Just yesterday, I joined Representatives Neguse, McGovern, and Lee to propose a constitutional amendment to permanently overturn Citizens United and restore some measure of faith that our elections do not belong to the highest bidder. Yes, this is a tough Congress for this type of legislation, but their introduction lays out a roadmap for the day when sanity and principle return. It helps force a debate, and maybe, just maybe, it persuades a few friends across the aisle that the checks and balances that have safeguarded our liberty for 2.5 centuries are still worth preserving. In the meantime, we're conducting oversight, vigorous oversight. We're demanding accountability and exposing wrongdoing throughout the federal government. We've spotlighted Trump's attacks on the rule of law with hearings the majority refuses to hold. We've revealed the sickeningly cozy friendship between Donald Trump and Jeffrey Epstein, between the president and the pedophile. We're creating a record of every single abuse, exposing executive malfeasance. Even in defeat, we are holding Republicans accountable. The victories have been modest, but for National Weather Service employees rehired after Democratic pressure, and the people who can still track storms and potential disasters as a result, it matters. For the California farmers still able to visit USDA field offices DOJ tried to shutter, these small wins are meaningful. They may perhaps even inspire other successes. For pregnant mothers hungry for information about whether vaccines are safe for themselves and their children, we are bringing forward witnesses to share best practices, not base conspiracies. And as we approach the government funding deadline at the end of the month, we are fully prepared to fight for lower health care costs in the nation's budget. Then there is the second prong of our defense of democracy. The Atlantic calls it the anti-Trump strategy that's actually working. Lawsuits, lawsuits, and more lawsuits. Since January 2025, plaintiffs have brought more than 400 cases challenging the administration's abuses. 400. Already the courts have halted these egregious abuses in more than 100 such cases. Wrongfully terminated civil servants reinstated. Funding to the CDC, AmeriCorps, and other agencies restored. deportation flights grounded, the dismantling of the Department of Education halted, Trump's illegal tariffs struck down, including by a Trump-appointed judge. These battles may not be over. The Roberts Court may yet excuse this executive malfeasance, but even a fragile bulwark delays autocracy's march. Even a temporary stay means another month that a mother can be with her family, a dedicated civil servant can do their job, a university can fulfill its mission. After all, you know the courts are doing something right when Stephen Miller is raging online about unelected rogue judges. Ultimately, though, the most powerful check we have on Trump's authoritarianism is not the Congress, it is not the courts, it is the American people. It is all of us, each of us. Fear is Donald Trump's weapon of choice. Divide and conquer is his one repugnant strategy. Law firm against law firm, media outlet against media outlet, neighbor against neighbor. He counts on us being too scattered to oppose him, too scared of a truth social media post or an executive order, or the very real threat of physical harm for anyone to push back. So there's something incredibly powerful when someone looks King Donald in the eye and says simply and with their whole being, piss off. In the university that pledged it will not surrender its independence or relinquish its constitutional rights. In the law firm that defiantly declared capitulating to unconstitutional government coercion is simply not in our DNA. In the federal prosecutor, a former clerk for Kavanaugh and Roberts, who resigned rather than obey a lawless order, I expect you will eventually find someone who is enough of a fool or enough of a coward to file your motion, he said, but it was never going to be me. During the depths of apartheid, it was RFK, the heroic original, not the brainworm-addled junior, who reminded us that each time a man stands up for an ideal, or acts to improve the lot of others, or strikes out against injustice, he sends forth a tiny ripple of hope, and crossing each other from a million different centers of energy and daring, those ripples build a current which can sweep down the mightiest walls of oppression and resistance. From the CDC to the Social Security Administration, from state houses to school boards to the streets, courageous, committed Americans have sent forth those ripples, and we have seen a powerful current building and building. Just weeks ago, it was thousands marching here to protest the federal takeover of D.C. In June, it was more than 5 million Americans in 2,000 cities and towns across the country declaring that the United States would have no more kings. We've seen it at the ballot box in Wisconsin, in Iowa, in Virginia, where Americans are voting over and over for democracy, where Democrats standing against Trump power grabs are winning in deep red districts, exceeding past Democratic performances in those districts by 15, 20, 47 points. This administration is working so feverishly to tamper with district lines and voter rolls because they sense what's coming. And as Americans head to the polls in 2026, our voices, our ballots will determine, in Lincoln's words, whether we shall nobly save or meanly lose the last best hope of earth. We should be under no illusions about the magnitude of the challenge before us, but neither can we allow ourselves to be paralyzed by it. Lately, and thanks to my colleague John Hickenlooper, I have found myself quoting the Revolutionary War general Nathanael Greene. He was the second best known Revolutionary War general after Washington, which means that nobody's ever heard of him. Greene was responsible for Georgia and the Carolinas and badly outnumbered by the British. But his strategy, he wrote to Washington, was simple. We fight, get beat, rise, and fight again. Churchill, in last century's great struggle against authoritarianism, summoned his countrymen with much the same spirit. We shall not fail or falter. We shall not weaken or tire. Neither the sudden shock of battle nor the long-drawn trials of vigilance and exertion will wear us down. Give us the tools, he said, and we will finish the job. In our own time, in our own country, we recall Narciso Barranco, the landscaper taken by ice, beaten, bloodied, but asking only one thing of his sons, that they take up the tools and finish the job. That is our charge as well, to take up the tools of our democracy and finish the job. We will fight, we may get beat, but we will rise and fight again. In this pivotal moment, that unyielding commitment is what is demanded of us all. That is how we will sustain our sacred democratic inheritance and deliver, battered but unbroken, to the next generation. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Senator Schiff, for that really robust analysis of where we are. And I do think so many of us are anxious about where we are. So we're also grateful for your battle plan of how we defend our democracy and come out of this moment. But I think, people are particularly concerned and scared in the last week because of the events. Obviously, the murder of Charlie Kirk, which was reprehensible and has been rightly condemned across the political system, across the political spectrum, occurred, and it is taking place at a time where, when we've had previous leaders, they would call us to unite against violence. Instead, we are seeing essentially a rationalization of additional violence, efforts to paint half of America as radical, using the term they, and describing the murder of Charlie Kirk. Karl Rove actually speaking out today against basically political forces trying to use this murder to demonize whole sections of the country. As you talked about, this is not the only instance of violence. The assassination of two Democratic legislators in Minnesota, the arson of Governor Josh Shapiro's residence, the attempted assassination of President Trump. What do you say? What is your analysis of the moment we're in? And what do you think we can do to address this sort of using almost the threats of violence as a tactic, as a political tactic? And how do we create more of a space for healthy debate and, do as our founders so ably wanted us to do, which is mete out our political opposition and discourse in the debate of ideas and not with the reduction to violence?
I've been in the Congress long enough to remember a time when elected officials were rarely the subject of threats. For my own part, if I received a threat in a period of 5 years, it was a rarity. Now, if I can go 5 days without one, that is more of a rarity. And it's not just members of Congress, it's city council members, it is school board members, it's private citizens. We have traveled down this dangerous path, and many of us have been warning about this for years. The answer to it cannot be either what the president is doing and saying to further divide us, nor can it be, in our response, adopting the loathsome language that he is using. Instead, we need to continue to point out to our fellow Americans that this is a bipartisan, nonpartisan scourge, that there are victims of horrendous violence whose views are on both sides of the political aisle and everywhere in between. And that we as a country, if we are to save this incredible experiment democracy, have got to get back to resolving our disputes through the ballot box. And that is the only response that we can make. And so, yes, we will have to guard against the federal government now going after nonprofits, the further demonization of people like George Soros, all the dog whistles and everything else. At the same time, we have to call on our fellow citizens to remember the best of ourselves. During the first impeachment of Donald Trump, when I realized this was not an ordinary prosecution where I merely had to prove the president guilty, but rather I had to demonstrate why he was a danger to the American people, I made a very simple argument, and I think it is the same argument today. This president doesn't know right from wrong. This president is incapable of telling the truth. He is fundamentally indecent. And he's not who we are. We are a decent country populated by decent people in every state of the union. We have to remember who we are. And particularly among times of terrible tragedy, we have to remind ourselves who we are and of the proud legacy our founders left behind and of our obligation to our children to pass on that legacy.
Thank you so much for that. And to build on what you were just referencing, we've seen widespread calls from the far right and the White House, including the president and Vice President Vance, to go after funders, nonprofits, entities on the left. You know, now there's a CEO on Antifa. You know, Stephen Miller, the deputy chief of staff at the White House, has basically called the entire Democratic Party an extremist organization. How do you see this and the broad discourse around free speech, around freedom of assembly, around these basic principles that, you know, we have held so dear?
Well, what we've seen in the last 8 months is a continuing escalation of lawless action, broadening of their targets, a use of tactics and tools and government coercion in ways we've never seen before, whether it is forcing universities to pay millions and millions of dollars or lose research funding, or law firms to do pro bono work, which might include defending unlawful tariffs. We are seeing media companies literally forced to pay the person of the president millions of dollars if they want a merger to go through or if they don't want to be the subject of vindictive action by the FCC. And now we can expect that enterprise to expand, to go after any pockets of resistance in the country. And the response to that has to be just what I have been describing, but now on a broader field. And that is, we're going to have to use oversight to expose these abuses. We're going to have to call out the corruption of a regime that would say to a media organization, pay me $16 million or I will destroy your business. We have to use litigation, which again will be the most important remedy to delay and deter and defeat where we can these lawless actions. And we're going to have to mobilize like never before. So often I think there is a hunger, and I understand it, for some magic button we can press, some magic legislative tool, some recourse we simply haven't thought of that is waiting to be utilized. And the answer is, it is going to take all of us, using all the tools we have, to fight back against this ever-expanding attack on our right to associate with whom we would, and to speak as we would, to assemble as we would, to love whom we would love. It is going to take all of us acting together, using every tool to stop it.
And I'm going to get to audience questions in another minute, so hope people are getting their questions together. There's been so many events, even in the last week, that it almost feels like a week ago that the FBI director testified in front of the Senate Judiciary Committee. There was very lively exchanges yesterday in the House. He could not recall the murder of 9 people in a Baptist church. But he also, you had an exchange with him on the Epstein case in which he became extremely enraged. And perhaps it was because you were asking about a topic in which the FBI, after promising to be transparent, has chosen to withhold the files. But I would love for you to just provide us a sense of those remarks, and what did you take away from Director Patel's testimony?
Well, like so often in this era, we have to remind people what is normal and what is not normal. I was an assistant U.S. attorney for almost 6 years in Los Angeles. I worked closely with the FBI. They have been America's premier law enforcement agency, second to none. I would say even more so, the preeminent law enforcement agency in the world, trusted for their expertise and their professionalism. And as a former assistant U.S. attorney, to see the leadership of that premier agency in the hands of such an incompetent, in the hands of someone so patently unfit to lead the men and women, the hardworking men and women of the Bureau, is just heartbreaking. I can only imagine the trauma to the morale of the agents. And the problem is that as those agents go into courthouses around America, they are impeached by the lack of credibility of their leadership. It is all too easy to argue you cannot believe them because you cannot believe the leader of the agency, an agency that is so clearly weaponizing its power to go after its political enemies. That doesn't improve the safety of the American people, nor does pulling people off of important counterterrorism, counterintelligence, or other work to participate in immigration enforcement make America more safe. And so I think if his appearance before the House and Senate have demonstrated anything, it is that, like so many of our other agencies, its leadership is incompetent and antithetical to what we, as the American people, have a right to expect, and that is someone who is ruthlessly impartial and nonpartisan and elevates the experience and expertise of the people in his employ, not going after people to serve the president's retribution campaign.
Okay, I think we have time for some questions from the audience. There's some rules for questions from the audience. If you could just say your name, and really, if you could ask a question, that would be great. I will try to enforce that. We'll take questions from the audience and then go to the online group. Over here, this corner, go ahead.
Hi, I'm David Smith of The Guardian. Just in the wake of Jimmy Kimmel's show getting cancelled on ABC, I just wondered, what have you thought of the response of corporate media and big corporations to this Trump presidency? Have you been dismayed by the speed of capitulation?
With respect to America's media companies, I have been really shocked by how quickly they have placed their financial near-term interests above any other consideration. In the House of Representatives, I represented Paramount for years and years. And the idea that CBS would capitulate in a lawsuit by the president that CBS's own lawyers rightfully said was totally baseless. I mean, I'm not a First Amendment lawyer, but I am a lawyer, and I have studied the First Amendment. The idea that you can sue as a public figure a media organization because you don't like how they edited your opponent's interview is preposterous. I mean, laughably without merit. And there is no question that CBS paid off the president, Paramount paid off the president so their merger could go through. It was a financial decision. And what I urged Paramount before, and I discussed with Paramount after, okay, I get it, it's a financial decision, but I thought you were a news organization. I thought that you had some reverence and respect for the First Amendment. I thought you would defend the First Amendment. 60 Minutes above all. And that precedent and the one before it when ABC also paid off the president. Where does that leave us? The president now serving the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal, and the list goes on and on. He's using the power of the FCC to coerce and threatening not just media companies, but all companies. The idea that to export your goods, you need to give the government a share now, or maybe you need to give the president personally a share in the form of a payout, should have the business community screaming. But you know why they're not screaming? Because they're afraid. I would have never imagined a world in which the Business Roundtable or the Chamber of Commerce, these conservative organizations, wouldn't be screaming if a president was doing such things. But they're cowed. They've all been cowed. The only way we get past this, the only way we get past this collective action dilemma is if we are willing to stand up. Cowardice is contagious, but so is courage. And we need more to follow an example of the handful who have, of media organizations, of colleges, of law firms, of businesses that have basically told the president to piss off.
Can I just ask you a follow-up on that basic question about the institutions? If you look back, what's fascinating about the cowering of these institutions is that the president isn't popular. He doesn't have a majority of the country. People who supported him before have fallen away. He's governing with minority support. He won the election fair and square, not arguing that, but he is not governing with a strong majority support in the country. And in many ways, as you reference, actual Americans are turning out to vote at high numbers. People are protesting in the streets. But this is a fundamental difference from the first term where institutions, some of which did stick up, are really fundamentally cowering, which makes, I think, a lot of people much more scared. So how do you analyze that? What is your message to people who look at people as powerful as leading scions of companies, CEOs say nothing, as the Federal Reserve is under a massive attack, and yet average Americans are standing up and speaking out and, most importantly, engaging in the political process. People are protesting. They're not putting masks. There might be masks at ICE, but people are protesting with no masks on because they're still unafraid to speak out.
So let me start with my own cohort of elected officials, because one of the most bitter epiphanies for me in the last decade has been about my own colleagues. People who I respected, many who I admired, because while I didn't agree with them, I at least believed that they believed what they were saying. And I came to learn that actually most of them, almost all of them, didn't really care about what they were saying, and certainly didn't care about it as much as they cared about holding their position. I would have thought prior to the last 10 years that if we ever faced a president as corrupt as this one, as venal and vile as this one, that there would have been 100 Elizabeth Cheney, 100 Liz Cheneys, 100 Adam Kinzingers, and I learned that they were just two. Just two. They're going to have a lot to be proud of to tell their kids and grandkids. I don't know what most of my colleagues are going to tell their kids and grandkids one day. Robert Caro once said in an interview that power doesn't corrupt as much as it reveals. It doesn't always reveal us for our best, but it says a lot about who we are. And I don't think it's that these colleagues that have gone from being supposed moderates to being right-wing conservatives, I don't think they've changed. I think it's just that we never really saw who they were. And the ideology was not the point. The keeping their position was the point. And, for any who still thought that some of these media organizations and some of these corporations were about more than money, sadly, we've come to see it's all about the money. It's all about the money. There is a price, and they're unwilling to pay it to live up to what they have aspired to in the past. So it has been a time of terrible revelation about what people are really all about. The remarkable thing about where we are in this moment, with our democracy teetering on the edge, the remarkable thing is that the Congress of the United States could stop it tomorrow. We could stop it tomorrow. It would just require a handful of Republican votes in the House and Senate. That is all it would require. We could put a stop to the lawless, indiscriminate arrests. We could put a stop to the extortion of companies and media organizations. We could put a stop to the abuse and weaponization of the Justice Department or the FBI. We could stop it tomorrow. We could rehire competent people to lead the CDC. We could make sure that people get their vaccines. We could restore health care to people about to lose it. If we had a handful of Republicans who were willing to do the right thing, we just don't. Which tells me that aside from the imperative of fixing our economy, which is central to this rise of authoritarianism, that it's not that there are flaws so much in the Constitution as in ourselves. If people don't give meaning to their oath of office, if the truth doesn't matter anymore, then no amendment's going to save us. So we need to make sure we're electing people of character. We need to make sure that we're undertaking our own civic responsibility of turning out in elections. We have to stand up even as others are afraid to do so they can be inspired by our example.
Thank you so much. Other questions? There's one right there. Sorry. And just let's do this quickly because we'll try to take one more question after this.
How's it going? My name is Riz. I'm a student at Georgetown. Just a quick question. You talked a lot about fighting back against Trump and whatnot, but my question pertains more to my generation, the young people here in America. It seems as if there's a lot of discontent with our generation. If you look at past election, we had young men.
Can I so move you to the question, please?
Okay, sorry. So what does it look like? What does a new vision look like to capture the youth vote again? Is my question.
Yeah, thank you for the question. There is a common denominator, I think, between Trump's win last year and Mamdani's win. And that is both were vigorously opposed to the status quo. And the status quo is deeply unpopular. To the degree the Democratic Party has become associated with the status quo or incrementalism, that is death to the political future of our party. Your generation doesn't need small fixes. A small fix isn't going to help you afford an apartment or buy a home. A small fix isn't going to increase your job prospects or help you pay for health insurance you can't afford. We're going to have to put forward bold ideas that can move this country quickly. To me, the central animating question in our democracy is also the central animating question in our economy, and that is, if you're working hard in America, can you still provide for yourself and your family a good living? My son just graduated from college. Of his fraternity brothers, the ones that were going to have a hard time finding jobs were the software engineers. We have to make sure that anyone who's willing to work hard in America can provide for themselves. My parents, my father was in the schmata business. He was a clothing salesman. And he, when I was a kid, he made $18,000 a year as a traveling salesman. On the strength of that single income, my parents bought our first home for $18,000. You could buy a house for the annual income of a clothing salesman. For your generation, the idea of being able to buy a home for your annual income is unthinkable. And the thing is, it is not that we're not a prosperous enough country to make that happen. But we have failed to keep pace with the changes in technology and globalization, automation, increasingly with AI. such that people are working harder than their parents did and have a lesser opportunity for the good life and some retirement security and good health care. And that has to change. That's what Mamdani was promising and has promised, and that's why he was super popular in that primary. And I think in order to win young people back to the Democratic Party, we're going to have to show that we're willing to move far and fast. The Republicans have shown us, with their horrible and dark, destructive agenda, they can move far and fast. And we can move this country far and fast in the right direction.
Last question right here. So, someone coming over to bring the last question right here. Thanks. Sorry.
Senator, thank you for your time today. My question is,
Can you just say your name?
Oh, I'm sorry. David Basler. You've supported the Term Act, which would term limit Supreme Court justices. I'm curious to know your thoughts on the pathway to passing that bill and what you would say to those who argue that it could politicize the court even more.
I actually think term limits on the Supreme Court is one of the most important reforms and would help us get past the politicization of the appointment of justices. And I say that because if we, for example, passed an 18-year term limit on the court, and I think we could do so constitutionally if we provide that when you reach your 18 years, you're not off the bench altogether, you're just rotated onto the Court of Appeals or the District Court. You still have lifetime tenure on the court, but you don't have lifetime tenure on a particular court. That would be consistent with the Constitution, which at the time didn't have the separation of the courts we do now. It would also mean that a president would know during the course of their tenure that they would have a certain number of justices to nominate and confirm. It would eliminate the gamesmanship we saw with Mitch McConnell delaying one president's nomination to try to jam another down the country's throat. To me, that is probably the single most important reform. Now, the challenge is this. Well, I believe that's clearly constitutional. I certainly wouldn't want this court to be the one adjudicating it, because you know how that's going to turn out. So we either have to wait until we have a very different court, or we have to expand the court so that it will not only pass a term limit or uphold a term limit, but it also will allow us to enforce a code of ethics upon the court. And that is more challenging, I will acknowledge, much more challenging. But I don't want my kids' generation, I don't want the young people in this country to have to spend their entire lives under a reactionary court that believes that corporations are people, that believes the president is immune from prosecution for criminal acts. I don't want to see them have to live their lives under Supreme Court that thinks that women have no right of reproductive freedom or to privacy. And if we're going to change that, it's going to require strong medicine like term limits.
I want to thank you so much, Senator, for your incredible remarks and for, so many people ask about meeting the moment, and I want to thank you for being a leader who is. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you, Neera.